While the Hurricanes did split the Easter weekend, there were some milestones that happened as well. So let's talk about it on a Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes.
Your Locked On Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Now, the number one sports podcast network. I'm your host, Zach Martin, the credentialed Carolina Hurricanes beat writer over at the Hockey Writers. Also the co-host of the Surgecast, which is a weekly Carolina Hurricanes podcast, along with all my duties here at Locked On Hurricanes. Like I said, on today's show, we're going to be kind of talking about the overall weekend that the Canes had, which was a back-to-back on Saturday and Sunday over Easter, winning on Saturday against the Islanders, unfortunately losing on Sunday to the Senators, as they are still looking to clinch the division, to get their fourth division title in 6 seasons. And then we're going to talk about the overall playoff picture and what it looks like after it's all said and done. But before we jump into that, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Now, the Hurricanes on Saturday night took on the New York Islanders, and this was the first of 2 potential chances for the Hurricanes to clinch the division. The other one, the fact that they were open for Sunday as well. But on Saturday, what they really needed to do was just kind of win in any fashion. For the most part, and the Pittsburgh Penguins needed to lose. Basically, they just needed to lose, or in any situation where the Penguins didn't win in regulation. Well, unfortunately, the Hurricanes or the Penguins won in regulation, so the division was kind of, going to have to wait until potentially Sunday for it to happen. So it's just one of those things where, all right, now let's just go get some points and go get some wins. And it was a pretty close game, that's for sure. It was kind of nuts when you kind of look at the overall, just how it ended. It's 1-1 after 1. 3-2 after 2, and the fact that in the third period, the Hurricanes do get, a 2-goal lead. Then towards the end, it gets a little dicey, but overall, they held on and got the win. Multi-point game for Seth Jarvis, 2 goals and assists. Kendra Miller with 2 assists. And for the fact that for Seth Jarvis, you're talking about 2 goals. That puts him at 32 on the season, which ties or puts him basically 1 away from a career high in his goals because he has 33, and it puts him really close to where he was at. And overall, it was just a great game from him. Just you look at the fact of the insane jump that he made on one of his goals, to where great breakout pass to spring it from Sean Walker, has a partial breakaway, and beats Ilya Sorokin, and then you feel like he did like a 40-foot high jump, basically both of his feet clear over the boards, which was absolutely crazy. And it's funny after too that he also talked about how they have been trying to dunk for the last 5 years, and it seems like it paid off. So of course, Seth Jarvis just being Seth Jarvis is always just great with the post game bites and sound like that. And, be able to see that in person too on press row is just crazy, because you kind of see how the play kind of starts down. Miller gets into Walker springs Jarvis, and of course Jarvis just uses his speed and gets the job done. And just the celebration too was awesome to see as well. So, the fact that even with missing 8 games, Seth Jarvis is so close to having a career high in goals again, and the fact that he's 1 away from tying, 2 from creating a new one. And what would have happened if he didn't miss those 8 games? Are you talking a possible 40-goal season? But even then, you're talking 34, 35. I mean, it's still very much doable with 6 games left. And I think that's just shows how much of a gamer he is and how good his scoring touch is. So overall, you like to see the performance out of that. Like I said, too, the game was insane when you look at the fact that the shots were 40-16 Carolina. Like, the Islanders had 6 shots through the first 2 periods combined, and then he had 10 in the third. That was the first time they outshot Carolina. But that just goes to show how much in control the Hurricanes were. It's just Sorokin pretty much kept in the game. And I wouldn't even put those goals, a couple of them, on Brandon Bussey. It was just, one of the goals was a guy wide open back door because of a defensive breakdown. Another one where, it's just a play that no goalie would have made on the first one. So it's just an unfortunate thing that happened. But, in the end, it kind of helps when you have a team that, just happens to shoots the lights out. Aho with 7 shots. Seth Jarvis was, 6. Jackson Blake with 3 shots. He had a goal as well. Defensively, Jalen Chatfield had 4. Like, everyone was basically putting pucks on net. And the fact that, the power play went 0 for 3, PK went 1 for 1, but, in the end, it was a lot of the 5-on-5 that got the job done for the Hurricanes. And in the fact that, you saw a great shorthanded goal from Sebastian Aho after Slavin, spraying Jarvis on another one. Jackson Blake scores his 22nd and keeps his great season alive as well. So while the Hurricanes didn't necessarily win the division, you still saw them have fantastic nights across the board where you're seeing, like I said, Seth Jarvis is on the precipice of tying his goal total again. 3rd season in a row. You're looking at the fact that, the fact that he's going to do it again for the second time in 3 seasons. Like, he's already had 33, 32. He's at 32 again. Jackson Blake's having a great sophomore season. He's up to 22 goals. He still has the potential to put up 25 goals in 50 points in a season. That goes to show how good Blake has been in his second full season, because I asked him before the season started, what's your mindset? And he said he wants to get better. And this year he's most definitely done that. And even in the last 5 games, you're talking 4 points in his last 5, 22 goals, 27 assists for 49 points. Like, he's going to get 50. That's just going to be automatic. But the fact that he's 3 goals away from having 25, I still think that's very much doable. That just goes to show how, for him, just how confident he is in his shot. He had 17 goals last year in 80 games. This year he already has 22. His shooting percentage went from 12 last year to 13.3 this year. 165 shots this season compared to 142 last year. Also helps too that it's ice time, 1626 this season compared to 1351. But for Jackson Blake, that's kind of just a big thing that you've seen out of him. And like I said, even for Seth Jarvis, you look at where he's at right now, even with missing the 8 games due to injury. 3 straight 30-goal seasons, 33 2 seasons ago, 32 last year, 32 this year. He's 1 assist away from tying his career high that he set last year. He's 1 point away from 67 for 3 consecutive seasons. And he's obviously, he only needs 4 more points to hit 70 over the next 6 games. I think that you're really looking at easily a career year all again from Seth Jarvis. He only needs 2 more goals to set a career high in there. He only needs 2 more assists to set a career there. And like I said, he only needs 1 more point to tie, 2 to break it. So even with him missing time, he's going to set career highs across the board. And that's just how dominant of a guy Seth Jarvis has been this year. So that just the fact of how good he's been playing, how good Jackson Blake's been playing in his second year. And, even for Brandon Busky, despite the fact that he had the .813 save percentage on Saturday night, you're talking – he's up to 29 wins in his career. You can't really – you guys heard me talk about this. You can't scoff at the fact that the guy's got 29 wins on the season, and that just gives more confidence, or just gives you an understanding that, maybe it wasn't his best night overall, but he still made the saves that he really needed to and got the job done. He's on a 4-game winning streak. He's at 246 goals against and an .895 save percentage. And you guys heard me talk about this. Save percentage for Hurricanes goalies has to come as a context stat, but you don't fluke your way to almost 30 wins in a season. Yeah, it helps when you need the team in front of you scoring too, but Brandon Busty really needed to make big moments happen. Like I said, you look at the first 2 periods. He faced 6 shots in the first 2 periods. That's a lot of waiting for a guy to kind of get tested. But, when, it did get a little dicey, he was able to hold his own. And unfortunately, the 2 goals that kind of came earlier in the game, that's just 2 goals that no goalie would have had a chance to make. So I wouldn't even put any of them on Brandon Busty, as the game progressed. And even the 3rd goal was an extra attacker. So in reality, it is what it is. But, he got the win. That's all that matters. And there's a lot of guys who are, continuing to set, career, highs for Blake. Jarvis is that close. And in the end, you got your 49th win of the season. At that point, you're talking 49, 21, and 6. Now, you're still pushing for the number 1 seed in the East. You're getting just another step closer to the division, where on Sunday you had the opportunity to do it. So what did happen on Sunday? Well, we'll stick around and we'll talk about that in a second on a Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. There's nothing like being in an NBA arena. The crowd, the energy, the moment. Getting tickets, though, that part hasn't always been so simple. That's why Game Time has become the go-to app for scoring tickets fast without the hassle. It puts the advantage back where it belongs, with the fans. Being able to see the view from the seat before buying makes the decision so easy. Plus, it's great last-minute options, too, with the NBA tickets showing up at solid prices. Everything just feels quick, intuitive, and stress-free from start to finish. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. That's code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. And remember, it's gametime.co, not .com. Don't forget to check out the Everyday Club for an ad-free episodes and access to group chat with me and other listeners of the show. Tap the link in the show notes or the description to sign up today and join our Everydayer Club. Now, welcome to segment 2 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. All right, so we talk about the Hurricanes' 4-3 win over the Islanders on Saturday night, going into Easter Sunday, where the Hurricanes had another opportunity to clinch the division, and all they really needed to do was just get a point. Control your destiny, get a point, regardless of how you do it. You got it, you win the division. Unfortunately, Pittsburgh absolutely put it to the Panthers in a back-to-back over the weekend, so big thanks to the Panthers for that, even though they got eliminated and just decided not to show up, play basically their entire AHL roster. So Hurricanes had to control their destiny and get the job done themselves. Well, they did it on Saturday night, and on Sunday, they rested Jordan Staal and Jordan Martinook because you're talking about a one-game road trip on a second half of a back-to-back. You could rest some guys, no reason to put guys in a situation where, you want guys being healthy going into the playoffs. So you had Nick Delorier and just Barry Kotkaniemi come into the game. And I mean, after the first period, it was a little close, power play goal for the Hurricanes thanks to Logan Stankoven, 4 goals in 4 games for him. And then unfortunately, the Senators get a power play of their own. They get a lead, and then with the fact that you got 20 seconds left in the period, Andrei Svechnikov for his 29th of the season ties the game. And you're like, okay, it's pretty close. Shots are 15-13 after 1. Game is 2-2. Still pretty close. I think the Hurricanes will get the job done. Second period, it was Brady Tkachuk on a tip-in. Nothing you can do about that. Okay, it's 3-2 after 2. There's still a good possibility. While there was 6 shots each in the third period, didn't really matter because of the fact that the Senators scored 3 goals. Another power play from Shane Pinto, Brady Tkachuk for his second. Claude Giroux got an empty netter, but Taylor Hall got his 16th of the season to draw the Canes back within 2 at least by then. But then, of course, the Giroux empty netter makes it a 3-goal lead once again, and then that's pretty much about it. So, unfortunately, no division clinch there. You got to wait a little bit longer to see how that played out, but when you look at this game overall, Nikolaj Ehlers got an assist, 41st of the year, and that did give him 65 points on the season, which is a career high for him. So while the Hurricanes did lose this game, I still think for the fact that you're looking at a game on Sunday that saw a lot of milestones being reached in terms of the fact that, like I said, you got Ehlers, career high in points. That one was his 41st. Jackson Blake got an assist as well. So that's, points in back-to-back games, at least over the weekend. Andrei Svechnikov won away from 30 goals, which has been a big turnaround season for him. Even with the fact that it took him a little while just to even get points on the board, it took him 8 games, and you're talking almost a career high out of him. And the fact that, Sean Walker on the primary assist on the Taylor Hall goal gives him 100 assists on his career. Taylor Hall, 16th of the season. Well, that gives him 300 goals on his career as well. Jackson Blake with an assist. That's a multi-point game for him. And that's what really think stands out for this game is the fact that you're talking about career high in points for Ehlers at 65. Shot Walker 100 NHL assists for his career, and Taylor Hall 300 goals. All in all, that's not bad when you look at the fact that, yeah, it's a loss. It is what it is. The division title is going to be delayed a little bit longer. Hopefully they kind of wrap that thing up on Tuesday against the Boston Bruins for fan appreciation night in the last home regular season game before you move on to the playoffs. But if there is some silver linings to take a look at after, the fact that you're now 49-22-6 on the season, like I said, it's milestones. It's the moral victories. They don't really count on paper, but in a game where you had two of your best forecheckers, penalty killers out, when the penalty kill got absolutely, literally killed in the wrong direction, Senators went 2 for 2. They cashed in on both of those. Just not a great night for the PK. And, of course, it doesn't help when two of your best guys are out for undisclosed reasons. And the fact that you look at the faceoff dot too, 25 for 64 for 39%. You really kind of felt it without Jordan Stahl there, because basically you had Aho, Stankoven, Jankowski, and Jesperi Kotkaniemi. That was your center core. Obviously, possession was not really the best. Senators had better line changes. They were just able to score. And it was just a night where, there was no plus on the team. There were mostly a lot of -1s, a couple evens and stuff like that, but nothing to where you can really be happy about it. I mean, Shane Gostisbehere's +1 was the only plus on the entire team. I mean, Miller and Walker were both -2s. Everyone else was evens. That was really about it. Like, that's just that kind of night where, shots were pretty much even. Block shots, Senators at 22 compared to the Hurricanes 11. It was just special teams that really killed the Canes because, like I said, they went 0 for 2 on the PK. Yeah, they got a power play goal. Possession-wise, faceoffs were definitely heavily favored in the Senators. And Rod said after the game, it just wasn't their greatest game. You can just tell that, Ottawa was the better team, and Carolina kind of made it easy on them. And it doesn't help to where, it's just one of those things where they were just not in sync. And, they got some guys that came in who haven't played in a bit. This is Delorier's second game, 15 shifts, 13 minutes and 46 seconds. That was pretty much his night. Jesperi Kotkaniemi, 15 shifts, 14 minutes and 4 seconds. He had 1 block and 3 hits. No shots on the night. And that was his first game back on the ice in 15 games due to being a healthy scratch. So, yeah, you got a couple guys who've, either has only played their second game with the team, or a guy who's coming off out of the press box for the first time in 15. So, like I said, you're down to your best, forecheckers, penalty killers, and just, Ottawa's fighting for their playoff life. So that's just kind of the culmination of being in the wrong, just being in a situation where you're, playing a team that's really more desperate. You're resting your guys. You're bringing guys in who haven't really played in a hot minute. So that's just kind of how you're looking at it overall. So it's dang if you do, dang if you really don't, in terms of how you want to play this thing on a 1-game road trip on the second half of a back-to-back where you just played a really tight one the night before against, the Islanders. Now it's okay, where do you go from here? And then in the end, you got the loss, but you were able to get some milestones. Like I said, you got the career high for Ehlers, assists for Walker, and goals for Taylor Hall. So, I mean, you can't win them all. It is what it is. You're still 49-22-6 on the season. You got 6 games left. You're still in control of the number 1 seed in the East for the most part. And, the first round matchups are pretty much going to change a lot over the next few games. We could be coming down to the last week of the season, and then there's still implications of what the playoffs could look like. So that being said, what kind of is the playoff picture after Easter, after the Easter weekend, especially with the Hurricanes playing a back-to-back? Who will they potentially face, and how does it look overall in terms of the Eastern Conference? Well, stick around. We'll talk about that in a second on a Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Welcome back to segment 3 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. All right, so we talked about the Saturday win against the Islanders, talked about the 6-3 loss on Sunday against the Ottawa Senators on Easter. Now let's kind of take a look at the playoff picture. And right now, in terms of the Atlantic Division, Tampa Bay has won 102 points, Buffalo's 100, and Montreal is even at 100 points. So the top three in the Atlantic Division are all over 100 points, which is crazy to think about. Metropolitan, the Hurricanes, 104, Pittsburgh, 96, the Philadelphia Flyers, who a lot of people have thought were dead and buried, are at 90 points, and now they have the number 3 spot in the Metropolitan, 7-3 in their last 10, which is still kind of crazy, and they're on a 2-game winning streak, just like Pittsburgh. And then look at the wild card, Boston at 95 points. I feel like they've really put themselves into a good spot there. Ottawa, 90 points. They have the wild card 2 spot. The Islanders, who just fired Patrick Waugh and brought in Peter DeBoer, which is a crazy move. They're on the outside looking in now with Ottawa getting the win over the Hurricanes. Detroit, 88. Columbus, 88. Washington, 87. And that's basically it. Like, those are the – you're talking about you're talking about, what, 5 teams for the last spot? And unless Boston just completely falls apart, I don't know. I just don't see Boston falling out. So in reality right now, you're looking at, Tampa Bay playing Boston in the first round, if that's how it works out. If Tampa's the number 2 seed in the East and Boston's the wild card number 1, then it's Sabres Canadiens, which would be a very interesting first round matchup between those two teams. Same number of games played, same number of points. Of course, it goes by, head to heads and all that stuff. And then for the Metro, you're talking Carolina Hurricanes, who still sit as the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. They would take on the Ottawa Senators, and hopefully it's a lot better than it was on Easter Sunday. But but the Hurricanes did win the regular season series, so there is that to take into account. Yeah, so it'd be Hurricanes Senators in the first round, and then it'd be the battle of the Keystone State between Pittsburgh and the Flyers. That would be a wild back and forth series between those two teams if it's the Battle of Pennsylvania in the first round. But that's kind of what you're looking at. If the playoffs started today, it's Hurricanes Senators, Tampa Boston, then it's Buffalo, Montreal, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and that's your Eastern Conference right there. West still all up for grabs, but when you look at the Eastern Conference overall, the Hurricanes have played one more game than Tampa. Tampa is only 2 points back. Carolina's also 4 up on the Sabres, also 4 up on Montreal with the same number of games played. Pittsburgh is 5th right now with 96 points, and they've played one more game than pretty much everyone else. Boston, 95 points, also 78 games played, and then you look at 7th and 8th. Ottawa and Philadelphia both have played 77 games, both sitting at 90, and that's with a game in hand on the Islanders, and that's the same number of games as Detroit and Columbus, and also a game in hand on Washington. And that's kind of what you're looking at. You have 12 teams right now who can say they're going to make the playoffs, and you got 5 fighting for the last spot. And that's how it really is. But the fact that Ottawa technically has a tiebreaker on Philadelphia, they're the 7th best in the East, but the Flyers are 8th. So that's kind of what you're looking at in terms of the entire league. The Hurricanes are still 2nd in the entire AHL. They're 6 points back at Colorado, but Colorado, has 2 games in hand. Of course, they played on late Sunday night. So in reality, it's Colorado's President's Trophy to lose at this point, because they're pretty much 6 or 8 points up on everyone else. For the Hurricanes to bring this all back together, they're still in the dogfight for the number 1 spot in the East. The only team, Tampa's got 2 points back with a game in hand. Even if Tampa wins, Hurricanes are still in control of how it works out. Yeah, Tampa might have the edge on tiebreakers, but the Hurricanes still have the opportunity to go for the number 1 seed. And Mike Kelly said this on the broadcast on Sunday night. Their bigger percentage for the Hurricanes is Boston. It's like, I think it was like 46% chance of the Hurricanes would get the Bruins in round 1. There was about like 25% if they get the Senators, and that's if they win the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. If they get Boston, that means they're the number 2. Tampa, edged them out. Either team would be okay to face against. It would just be depending on, who out of those two do you feel more comfortable with. I think what the Hurricanes have done against both teams, I think they would be fine in a first round matchup. It's just, you got to figure out how you could. Like I said, you just played Ottawa Sunday night. You're gonna play Boston on Tuesday for the last home game of the regular season, and then you got a handful of games left after that. But you just got to take care of business, and the fact that playoff implications of seedings are still in line too, because like I said, while the two teams that they're kind of favored to play against, either Boston or Ottawa, the Islanders are still kind of there too. Even though they've lost 4 in a row and 3-7 in their last 10, they're not completely out of it yet. It's just, can Beer DeBoer find a way to force to bring these guys into a spot? Because right now, unless Boston absolutely collapses, I don't see them jumping out of the wild card. And Ottawa, as strong as they've been playing, 6-3-1 in their last 10, they're a team that's in a better spot. Everyone else that's below the cut line have all lost games, 4-2-3-1. That's the run they're on right now, and Ottawa just won. Boston, lost in overtime, but that's kind of the situation you're in right now. For the Hurricanes, all intents and purposes, you're looking at Boston and you're looking at Ottawa. Maybe there's one or two other teams that you could potentially face, but I think those are the two that you're going to be most likely going up against. Ottawa, it's been, I can't remember the last time the Hurricanes even maybe faced Ottawa in the playoffs. I don't know if they even have, to be honest. And, of course, we all know a couple seasons ago the Hurricanes faced the Boston Bruins, and that's where you had Max Domi, surprisingly enough, score 2 goals in Game 7 for the Hurricanes to knock out the Boston Bruins. So that's a very more fresh matchup, even though Boston does have the edge over the Hurricanes in the playoffs overall, but the Hurricanes have had the last laugh recently. So it'll be very interesting to see how all of it breaks down. But if you're Carolina, obviously you want to rest guys, but I'm still harping on this. You have to go get the number 1 seed in the East. You want to have home ice advantage the entire playoffs, not just the first couple rounds. I feel like you need it through the Eastern Conference Final, because the fact of whoever you get out of the Atlantic, if it is Tampa or Montreal or Buffalo or let's say it's Ottawa or Boston, depending on who you get in round 1, there's still a lot of teams up for grabs. Could you say Detroit? Could you say the Islanders? You maybe could see them in round 1, but I think past that, you're going to figure who you're going to get out of the Atlantic side of things, and that's where you're really going to need to be in a spot where you want to have home ice. So, you want to rest guys, but I still think that's kind of your next goal right now, is to wrap up the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference so you get that home ice advantage. So that way you're putting yourself into at least somewhat of a better spot, regardless of who the wild card 2 team is. So at least we're getting somewhat of a clear picture on who the Hurricanes could face. But like I said, with the fact that you still got some teams playing 5, 6, 7 games left of their seasons, anything could change over the next week and a half, essentially. So it's just, getting out there, still racking up the wins, get the points, put yourself into a good spot, and you kind of get geared up for round 1, regardless of who it is, if it is Boston or Ottawa or one of these other teams that are just below the cut line who still have a shot. So it'll be interesting. I mean, at least you kind of split the weekend. You got 2 points out of 4. It'd been great if you went 4 for 4 and clinched the division, but Hurricanes still have a shot to do it. Like I said, Pittsburgh, they're still somewhat moderately close, but I still think of the fact that the Hurricanes are, relatively, you're talking 8-point difference. I think the Hurricanes are going to wrap this thing up. It's probably going to be Tuesday night against Boston, or at least sometime this week. They're going to wrap up the division. Now it's just, take care of that. Now go get the Eastern Conference and get ready for round 1 of the playoffs that start on the 18th and the 19th. So we're not that far away. It's just kind of, grinding it out, get to these games, get the points, stay healthy, and that's kind of what the big deal is right now if you're the Canes moving forward. So we'll see how it all plays out, but in a weekend full of silver linings, at least we saw some really cool milestones and really cool celebrations and all that stuff, and now it's just kind of getting ready for Tuesday night against Boston, and hopefully we get some more celebrations with the division titles and hopefully number 1 seeds in the Eastern Conference sooner rather than later. But guys, this will be the Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Thank you for making your first look of the day. If you never missed an episode, the Everyday Club is for you. Locked On Hurricanes ad-free, plus a members-only Discord access and more. Head to the link in the show notes or the description to join the club. It's $5 a month or $50 for the entire year. For those of you on video, we send you to the first ever 24/7 National Locked On Podcast Network YouTube channel. On audio, make sure to make your second listen to NHL Game Night on Locked On AHL. If you want to keep up with me and One True Zach on X, the podcast is LO_Hurricanes. We're also on Blue Sky, D Zachary Martin, where if you click the link tree in my bio, you can find all my written content at thehockeywriters.com. I'm putting out a lot of stuff recently. Talking about Shane Gostisbehere, drop my article on, asking questions to Robert Brennemore, Jackson Blake, and Seth Jarvis after the game on Saturday night, and a whole bunch of other stuff, so make sure to go check those out. If you want to check my other podcasts, search Cast on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. For Locked On Hurricanes, we're on Spotify, Google, Apple, iHeartRadio, wherever you listen to your podcast. Make sure to leave a 5-star rating and review. And if you're on YouTube, it's Locked On Hurricanes. Subscribe, hit the bell notification so miss a show. Hit the thumbs up so let me know if you like the show as well. Share with other Keeniacs and become everydayers just like you. But hope everyone enjoyed the Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Enjoy your Monday. And until next time, as always, let's go Canes.